All right, everybody. So we have hit the 2 p.m. mark, so we will go ahead and get started. Thank you all that were able to join today's presentation. My name is Asa Hedstrom. I am the marketing coordinator here at Gozone Wi-Fi. And as we get started, I just want to give a few reminders here. So first of all, if you check the files on the right side of your screen, you should be able to download the presentation for today's webinar. If you like to open that file on your own computer and follow along down. Also, if for any reason you experience any connection problems during the presentation, there is a little reconnect button at the top of your page. So maybe if you're on your home network and you have a little jumpiness with your connection, you can click that button to reconnect to the webinar. And then finally, if for any reason you have to exit early for today's presentation, 24 hours from now, you will get a follow-up email with a full recording of today's webinar. So just a heads up on that as well. So let's go ahead and officially get started. Today's presentation is how to monetize guest Wi-Fi with Wi-Fi advertising. And so just a quick look at the agenda for today. We are going to meet the team and then have a introduction of Gozone itself, followed by getting into the meat and potatoes of today's presentation, talking about Wi-Fi advertising 101, getting into more specifics, Wi-Fi advertising in terms of sponsorships, who does Wi-Fi advertising specifically work for, specifically types of venues and industries, how to get started with Wi-Fi advertising, and then at the end of today's presentation, we will have a Q&A session. So if you have any questions, please feel free to save those until after the presentation, where our panel will answer anything that you may have for them. So let's go ahead and meet the team, and I'll send this off over to our Director of Marketing, Elizabeth Weddle. Elizabeth, take it away.
Thank you, Asa, and thanks everybody for joining us today. I'm Elizabeth Weddle, Director of Marketing here at Gozone. Super excited to be here virtually with my awesome team and discuss Wi-Fi advertising with you all. Just to piggyback on what Asa said, if you do have questions, feel free to throw those in throughout the presentation. We want this to be conversational. We're just really going to be chatting like we're, hanging out over a beer, and unless you've got LaCroix or I think Diet Coke in Todd's case. But we're all just going to be chatting and hopefully learn something today. So to introduce the rest of our team that we have on the panel today, Wayne Newton is our VP of Channel Partnerships. He's joining us from LA. Wayne works very actively with our partners, our reseller partners, our hardware partners, and venues to create and actually go live with advertising campaigns in all different types of venues. And he's really the expert at coming up with unique solutions to all different types of problems for venues and network operators. Also joining the conversation, we're grateful to have our CEO, Todd Myers, with us today. Todd founded Gozone over 7 years ago, I think 7 years ago this month. Yeah. And he's going to give us a little bit of that story as to how Gozone was created and founded and how we got to where we are today. Todd, you want to take it away?
Sure. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Really, Gozone Wi-Fi, if you look at why we have the name that we've got, a Gozone, what is it? Well, I'll tell you the story about how I founded the company. And first of all, I've been in the Wi-Fi space for about 30 years. So, before we even called it Wi-Fi, we called it 802.11. We were putting Wi-Fi networks in venues. But I really started the company because I was down in Mexico and really living there. And I found it very frustrating and annoying to go from a restaurant to a bar to another venue. And I had to type in this long WPA password for Wi-Fi. It just wasn't easy to use at all. And of course, cellular service is expensive when you're traveling internationally. So Wi-Fi is the preferred method to connect, right? So I thought, how could I easily put access points in the popular spots that I go, so I don't have to type in the password all the time, quite honestly. So Gozone really started by me putting access points in retail hotspots and other locations near the cruise terminal where the tourists, kind of unloaded or disembarked. And what we did there is as they logged in, they would see Wi-Fi advertising, and the advertising was all the other venues in the tourist areas that I had Wi-Fi service at, so the restaurants and bars. So I was actually trying to, advertise to the person that just got to the port and bring them over to the tourist areas and attract them to come over to a particular restaurant or bar. So, the company was founded on Wi-Fi advertising. What I thought was difficult to do, though, as we scaled the business up, is to manage all of those campaigns and the advertising. And restaurants always wanted to change the images and things like that, and there just wasn't an easy way to do it. So I went back to my development team that I had previously had with other companies that I founded, and lo and behold, we started building platforms, and here we are today with 3 Wi-Fi monetization platforms, and that's how Gozone got started.
And he's got the hat behind him to prove it.
I do, my sombrero. Yes, Wayne, thanks.
It wasn't all work. There was a little fun too, huh?
Whenever you're in Mexico, there's always fun, right? This Diet Coke would have tequila in it, though, Elizabeth.
Ah, I see. Well, I'm glad you mentioned, kind of summarized our philosophy at Gozone really well there with, again, going back to solving problems. You found that it was difficult to manage these networks, that, it was difficult for the user, it was difficult for management, and Gozone really works to solve those problems. And Wi-Fi advertising is really one of those solutions. So before we dive into some really cool examples of how this is being used today, we just want to make sure we're all on the same page as to what is Wi-Fi advertising. The way we're going to define that for today's purposes is really any type of advertising that takes place over a guest Wi-Fi network. So within that context, you have first and third party ads, right? So we'll go through some really neat examples of how venues are using first party advertisements and mechanisms to promote their own products and services and brand, as well as how they're using that advertising real estate to sell sponsored or third party advertisements. When we talk about real estate, what are we talking about? There's a few different places that Wi-Fi advertising can exist. What does it look like? That could be a 30-second pre-roll video on a captive portal page. It could be a singular banner ad on a Wi-Fi authentication redirect page, right? What we call a landing page. Or it could even be a branded message in an email that goes out to a Wi-Fi user. It could be one or all of those things that would make up a Wi-Fi advertising campaign. And Wayne's really good at kind of explaining how this doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? Wi-Fi advertising, as we like to put together for our partners and our customers, is always usually part of a more holistic advertising strategy, right? So Wayne, do you want to kind of comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd like to kind of kick it off by also highlighting the fact that because you're dealing with a very targeted audience in terms of people that are logging onto a guest network on premise, you have a unique opportunity to drive some real impact in the impressions that you're making, because they're already expressing interest in what you offer as a venue because they're physically there. They're also looking directly at the advertising message as a function of getting onto that guest network, which is something that they want to do. So we'll talk more about affinity and some of the impressions and the impact that you can make as we move through the rest of this presentation. But one of the biggest values of Wi-Fi advertising is how targeted and timely it can be. And it works for small and large companies alike across a lot of different types of venues. It can work as a standalone, in other words, helping a venue or an operator get into the business of Wi-Fi or of advertising in general. But it also can be used, and most commonly is used as a complement or a supplement to other marketing or advertising that's going on either off-premise or on-premise. And we'll talk through a couple of different examples of that, of current clients and partners that we're working with that are doing just that as we get a little further into the presentation.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point that you make, is that a lot of times Wi-Fi advertising is going to be a complement to what's already being done. It's not necessarily reinventing the wheel. And for that reason, it drives a lot of interest, or we drive a lot of interest in the product, because it's really seamlessly can fit into an existing business strategy.
And it's
Yeah,
approachable. I'm sorry, Todd. It's approachable because, as you said, a lot of the assets that you're talking about in terms of collateral or content that you would be using in the purposes of this advertising has already been created.
Yeah.
And I think you're right in that, as an example, you may have a stadium that has a sales team out there and they're selling, banners behind home plate, or they're selling, digital display messages on the scoreboards and things like that. This is just another way to capture eyeballs, right? But I think there's some definite advantages of Wi-Fi advertising which we're about to kind of get into right now anyway. But there's so many different ways to have Wi-Fi advertising as an enhancement to some existing revenue stream, whether it's advertising based or maybe it's complementary. I'll give you an example. We're dealing with a mall property right now, or a group of mall properties, and they want to promote the tenants within the mall. So that is a great opportunity for the mall to promote the tenants. It helps them justify CAM costs or common area maintenance costs and increase the rents, or just show the tenants that, hey, we are trying to market you, et cetera. So it can be used also a number of different ways to generate revenue directly and indirectly.
Right. And to go back to your example of the stadium, I think that it's important that we highlight some of the main differences between maybe your traditional advertising that you'd see in a stadium and Wi-Fi advertising, right? So I know one that you like to talk about a lot, Todd, is, the eyeballs. How can you actually use the data that we're collecting over Wi-Fi advertising? Can you talk about the differences there?
Well, I mean, some of the differences just are inherent with Wi-Fi is the ability to report on it properly to an advertiser. And we'll kind of talk about that, I know, when we start talking about some of the costing and revenue ROI on it. But, if you look at a billboard, yeah, sure, there may have been 10,000 people that walked by a billboard in an airport, but how many people looked at that? There's really no easy way to tell an advertiser, well, out of the 10,000, 8,000 of them looked at it, right? I know that any advertisement that's delivered over Wi-Fi through the login process is being viewed, because it either people are looking at it 2 feet or 1 foot away from their face. So it's a very targeted advertisement and a very valuable impression for the advertisement.
Right. And of course, impressions and click-throughs, that's nothing new when we're talking about digital advertising. But to Wayne's point earlier, the point of Wi-Fi advertising being so on-premise, you're able to really inject ads based on where a person is physically located. That's really the power of Wi-Fi advertising as we look at it. So, Wayne, I don't know if you wanted to touch on that. If not, we can start diving into some of our use cases.
Yeah, we'll cover what I was going to say next.
Cool. So, what Wi-Fi advertising is not. Let's talk about that a little bit in a minute. But we want to focus on who Wi-Fi advertising is for. So we've kind of brought up airports. We've brought up obviously the shopping mall scenario. And another one that's really interesting that we've done over the past year or so is city and community. And obviously in the post-COVID world, we've seen a lot of cities and communities looking for data, looking for resources to drive economic stability and revitalization. So Todd, do you want to talk a little bit about what we did in the Edge District in St. Pete? It was a really cool project.
Yeah, what we did there is we really wanted to bring Wi-Fi, again, kind of going back to the Gozone origination, easy Wi-Fi for people to use across an entire few block area. So we went to what we call the Edge District, which is a business improvement district in St. Petersburg here. But we wanted it to be ubiquitous. So whether I'm at this restaurant or this restaurant, the SSID or the network name was the same. There would not be a password required for it, and just easy to get online. So that was really the goal of it. And really the goal was to make it so that the community could log in to internet access for free. It solved a couple problems of bridging the digital divide in certain cases. and just made Wi-Fi access a lot easier, so you didn't have to be a patron, essentially. But we also wanted to make sure that we did not have to rely on the city, which would mean RFPs and approvals and potentially license agreements with light poles, et cetera. So we partnered up with the Business Improvement District in the area. We partnered with each individual businesses. We put in access points, supplementary access points in those businesses. And we enable those businesses to get information on the guests that are logging into their network. But at the same time, as people are logging in, we do that cross marketing. As you see on the screen, we have Icon, which is a large residential property that's in St. Petersburg. So as people are logging in at the restaurant nearby or the bar nearby, they're also seeing advertisements for the Icon, and that, of course, book a tour so they can go and hopefully lease from that property. So there's all kinds of different ways we can, use advertising to help pay for the management and infrastructure costs associated with that particular network, and that's going to be very important as Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6 becomes more prevalent. You're going to have, and post-COVID. I mean, think about post-COVID. The people now expect good quality internet everywhere they go for now all kinds of new applications that even before COVID they may not necessarily have done, like video conferencing on a regular basis. So with that comes cost, right? We have to have good hardware to support it. We have to have a good network infrastructure that supports it, and then backhaul. That costs. So how can we help offset the costs of, that? Advertising is one of those ways to do that. But in our community environment, we actually have another benefit, and that goes straight to the Business Improvement District, where with the analytics that we're able to provide, we can now show them, hey, this year we're down 10% from last year at the same time because of COVID, and actually attribute numbers of devices that are seen, essentially. And that's valuable information for the Business Improvement District to report back to the business. So all kinds of benefits, from putting these types of systems in place. But again, how do you pay for it? It's through, revenue generating opportunity. And it doesn't have to be a large stadium, in this particular case. Wayne, I think you were talking about MDUs the other day as well with somebody, right?
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback off of some of the things that Todd and Elizabeth were saying, we've been pretty active, especially during this past pandemic year, getting involved in a lot more community and city-based projects, just as local organizations are investing in bridging the digital divide and providing internet access to the disadvantaged, and all the things that are driving a lot of that kind of activity. So that's been a very hands-on portion of our business, where we're not only doing what we do, but also devoting and donating our time and looking at as a public works or a charitable sort of activity for us as a business. In the more commercial oriented types of applications, like large public venues, public transportation, some of the other verticals that you see listed on the screen here, we're equally active, and that's working both with hardware companies as well as channel partners, IT providers, helping bring some of these monetization vehicles to their venues. And in the case of the MDU space, similar to an airport, similar to a retail mall, you've got a landlord basically, and then you've got other constituents. And if there's any avenue for providing a public network, that might be a common area in an MDU property. It could be, the common areas and inside of a large resort property. You're gonna be providing some kind of guest Wi-Fi because it's expected by the people that are visiting, and you've got revenue opportunities to present to that venue and to sponsors to reach those guests with targeted messaging. And we're seeing a lot of that increasingly happen in that MDU space, as property managers are starting to realize that there's value to bringing this kind of analytics and monetization to those spaces.
Yeah, and I think it goes also hand in hand with even potentially advertising or promoting as an example, in a stadium, maybe you want to promote concessions, right? So that goes back to the first party and third party advertising. So maybe a mall wants to, promote space for rent. Maybe that could be an ad on there as well. So there's all kinds of different ways you can kind of formulate what Wi-Fi advertising is and how it could best be used. And that's what's really been cool about working with the partners that we have and the hardware companies and the different venues to just get the creative juices flowing, because digital marketing is kind of new still anyway. Even the web page advertising, et cetera, is not new, but outdoor, out of home type digital advertising is kind of new, and there's a lot of opportunity there to get creative, have it blend in with other campaigns that they may have going on, with whether it's bus benches or digital signage or any number of different types of campaigns that could be rolled into that type of a overall solution or ecosystem.
Yeah, one thing that I'd really like everyone that's attending this to take away as a key message is that it's much more broadly appealing across verticals and sizes of businesses than I think we all might realize. I know I've been working for Gozone for 2 years, and I've been really pleasantly surprised at how broadly appealing the advertising component of what we do really is. You've got the most purest form of it, which would be maybe a public transit operator making the viewing of an ad a condition of getting onto the guest network, where they're literally using an advertising video or a banner as the thing that has to happen in order for you to get onto Wi-Fi for free. And we're all familiar with that sort of thing. Watch this ad, to get to this and that. So that's a very pure form of advertising, but there's also much more indirect forms of it that have equal or greater value. And another example of that, a more recent example of that I've been working on specifically, is in the resort property business, where you've got an IT provider that's providing internet into the property. They got a long-term contract. They're providing managed IT services, and they've got a lot of relationships around the local area, kind of similar to the story Todd told at the beginning around the founding of our company. And they're looking to add more value to the relationship they have with the property that they serve. So they're using an advertising vehicle like we provide as a way to get into a new business and to create stickiness with them and their existing clientele, as well as forge new relationships outside of the resort property and bring additional advertising revenue streams in. In that case, it's going to be a little bit of a shared model between them and the property. But the point of a lot of what we're talking about in the example I just gave is that there's a lot of different ways that you can utilize these kind of things once you start to understand what you have to work with, and then apply it to whatever your particular case is, if you're an operator or a venue.
Yeah, and let's piggyback on that a little bit. So we have obviously several different shapes and sizes of venues, service providers, operators that have there's proven value for all of these different constituents, but what do these different models look like? I see we have several service providers in the audience today, and I'm thinking, some of you might be wondering, how much could I make on something like this, and how much would an advertiser pay? So in your guys' experience, what does that look like? What types of models have you seen out there, depending on the venue, audience, content, et cetera?
Well, I think it's important to first understand kind of what the expectation is for traditional digital advertising, right? So, we look at Google ads that are supplying, spaces for 300 by 250 ads, et cetera. And, how much advertisers kind of expect to pay when you're dealing with an ad agency or direct with Google on that cost. So, if you own a website, as an example, and you bring somebody in, everything is measured by the thousands. So however many impressions there are per thousand is generally the rule of thumb, right? So on average, the typical website may bring in $3, $5 per thousand impressions, if you will. That's about it. But really, with Wi-Fi advertising, I think it really depends. We've seen the gamut of different models out there, and some of these models are getting $100, $200 per thousand. It really depends on the audience, the venue, and what combination of advertising mechanisms are being utilized. So we've seen, as an example, a festival. At the festival, they used advertising, and the sponsor put up their logo and their branding messages on the captive portal, the landing pages. At the same time, we were collecting email addresses for the venue themselves to promote the venue again next year, right? And that was an opportunity for the venue operator to say to the sponsor, hey, in addition to the visual advertising elements at the time of the event, we're also going to do follow-on campaigns throughout the year by emailing, that customer base updates on, the next year's event, and make sure you have that sponsorship as well. So it really depends on how it's packaged. And if you get creative on it, you can definitely garner more dollars, but it has to make sense for everybody, kind of involved. If that helps you, it is one thing that is not, and you hit on this earlier, Elizabeth, what Wi-Fi advertising is not. We don't believe, and we haven't seen it yet, be a sole stream of revenue to fully support a network of scale, right? So it's not a sole source of revenue that'll support a really good network, unless it's the perfect advertiser, the perfect network, and that sponsor is willing to pay, to get their message out in front of those eyeballs.
Yeah, I think one thing I would add to that is if the and it's along the same lines of the it depends, which sounds a little coy, but in this case, it really does depend, because if you look at a situation like a stadium or other large public venue, a racetrack, something where there's a significant amount of existing incumbent sponsorship as a business model activity going on, really what you're looking at is, as we mentioned earlier, an opportunity to really leverage all of that and supplement it with a very targeted add-on to all the other things that you're already doing. In that case, you're adding incrementally to what's already kind of core and common to the business model. It also could be, as we mentioned earlier, the way that a venue gets into the business of Wi-Fi monetization. And in that case, you're building it from scratch. But you can be very targeted, and you're going to be very dependent on it. And in a way, it almost becomes the primary marketing activity for a smaller business or a smaller venue, borderline CRM, not just advertising. And then there's everything in between. But the things that are consistent are, if you know how much traffic, or you can estimate how much traffic, then you've got a sense for sort of the pool with which you can work. And then the other major variables that are going to influence that cost per thousand or the ROI up are how effectively the message that you deliver reaches that traffic. In other words, how relevant is it? Then it's a matter of frequency around those sort of messaging to drive, the kind of engagement and those costs that you're expecting. But in general, and you look at Google Ads kind of as the benchmark, but it's a very mainstream kind of broad-based benchmark. In other words, it's sort of the low bar. You can expect to get quadruple or more the cost per thousand out of a targeted advertising model like this. And like Todd mentioned, in the good ones where there's really good work put into it, it's orders of magnitude larger than a Google ad. It's a high-powered rifle versus a shotgun.
Yeah, I think it's on the action as well. So is it directing somebody to a link? Is it directing somebody to download an app? All those are factors in this. And I remember we did one event that it promoted downloading of an app for a particular festival, right? That had extremely high take rates. But then we had another property that was a very well-traveled property that promoted the downloading of another type of app like an antivirus. It was not as effective because it wasn't as relevant. People aren't logging in to get access to an antivirus, where they are logging in They want the app for the show that they're on. So it really depends on the action as well.
Yeah, on the channel partner side of things, a lot of the work that I'm doing, when we get into talking about some of the ways that you can really drive impact or affinity with this sort of thing, one thing that I'm always reminded of, and I remind my partners of, is that you're talking about an on-premise activity, and so that gives you a unique opportunity to market or advertise with calls to action that are very immediate and that are very impactful. In other words, like you're at a stadium, you're attending some event, and you get an advertisement delivered to you right there, right then, encouraging you or incentivizing you to go to the concessions and buy something, or the merchandising area and buy something. That's why it can be so impactful, because it's on premise and it's very, very relevant to the activity that you're engaging in at that moment.
Right, and it's very timely too. That advertisement can be shown at a specific time throughout an event where, let's make hot dogs half off for the rest of the night, right? We can really get targeted and timely with those messages. And I know we're getting close to time here, but what I've been hearing over and over is that, us as a team at Gozone, we have a lot of knowledge on the best practices behind Wi-Fi advertising. And I just want to make it clear to any service providers on the call that, you might be saying, wow, this sounds like it could be lucrative. I do think I have venue properties that could benefit from this, but I've never dipped my toe in advertising before. Gozone began as an operator, right? We have always been an operator. And so our systems and the way we look at this is really, it's designed to be pretty easy. And I don't mean to dumb it down, but I do want to say that what we're saying is there's a lot of finesse, I guess, that would go into Wi-Fi advertising, but we'd love to talk more about any opportunities that are out there and see if there would be a good fit, really, because as you can see, we could talk for a lot longer about this, but I know we're at time. I don't see any questions in the chat right now, but if anybody, we'll keep this live for maybe about 30 more seconds and see if there's any more questions. And if you guys want to add anything else before we wrap up for today.
The only thing I'd add is just to encourage people, if they do have some questions or want to learn a little bit more and they'd be more comfortable doing it more one-on-one, there's a variety of ways to get a hold of us. We try to be very consultative and very conversational, as I hope you saw in the call today. Don't get into a bunch of sales pitches, but we believe in the kinds of things that we do, and we think that we can really add value if it's something that you're interested in either doing more of or getting into.
For sure.
Absolutely.
And I promise if you schedule a call with us, I'll go ahead and wear the sombrero that I have behind me as well.
Ooh. And will you provide tequila?
I was going to go there.
Little Don Julio, never hurt anybody, right? Yeah. So good. What do you think, Elizabeth? Any questions coming through?
No questions coming through yet. So we'll leave this slide live for a couple more minutes so you can jot down that link. Check out the gozone.wifi.com/Wi-Fi advertising. A lot of good info there, as well as an ebook. And if you want to schedule a call, feel free to use that link. We're here. Would love to talk. And we really hope that everybody that joined the call today was able to learn something that they maybe didn't know before. And if not, you left probably thirsty for tequila.
All right. Good job. Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone, for joining.